Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today is December 21st, 2022. Our last episode of The Pipeline for the year. So thank you all very much for joining us. As usual, I've got with us Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford. All ready for Christmas, Nigel?
You bet. Shortest day of the year, too. Just gets better from here.
It's the day of the solstice.
Yep. 21st.
Oh, it's all better from here. Yeah, perfect. Also got with us everyone's second favorite, Western Standard senior columnist and host of Untied with Cory Morgan. Cory Morgan. Hello, number two.
Always thrilled to be here, even if I'm a number two.
Remember, you're demoted.
I'm going to call you number two, like a Picard, except.
It's better than the number two reference in South Park. I thought you were going for there.
No. I was going for the old naval term,
Okay.
second officer.
Mm-hmm.
Number two. Or Dr. Evil. Number two. Yeah. Okay. For those of you who got it, it was mildly amusing. Okay. Today is going to be a bit of a change. We're going to be talking about the top stories of 2022, or the biggest stories, a mixture of the two. Some of the ones that were the biggest and most important, which are obvious, like the Freedom Convoy, and others that maybe didn't get as much media attention as they should have, but were very significant and important for 2022, like huge new federal regulation over the media and the internet in Canada that just really didn't get the attention they should have. But we'll be talking about things like the fall of Jason Kenney, the comeback of Danielle Smith, the great gun grab of this year, and of course, new federal controls over the media and internet in Canada. Before we get going, though, Cory's going to tell you all about my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
Yes, well, the name says it all. They're an association for people who enjoy shooting sports, whether you're a hunter, target shooter, or gun collector. It doesn't matter. It's nobody's business what you do with them anyways if you're law-abiding, but you need an association to stand up for your rights, plus to share resources. They got stuff like links to sporting events and upcoming gun shows, and most importantly of all, they're standing up for your right to own, possess, transfer firearms. So if you own firearms, you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. And their website is cssa-cila.org, or just Google them out, Canadian Shooting Sports Association, easiest way.
Beauty. All right, thanks a lot, Cory. Also, you got to get your Western Standard membership if you don't have it yet. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, shame on you. In fact, you can actually now buy the Western Standard as a gift. You got your dipshit niece, nephew, son, daughter going to university, getting all sorts of silly ideas about Marxism and being woke in their heads. Maybe expose them to some hard news and straight opinion. Get your kid, get your nephew, anyone who really needs a slap upside the head, a Western Standards membership for 1 year. You get it at westernstandard.news. And I believe you just click on membership and you'll find an option in there. All right, so we're going to start off with what was probably the biggest story of the year, quite possibly the most important story of the year, and frankly, the first really big news story of the year. So we're just going to have to start with it, the Freedom Convoy. We all know where this came from. We had on and off again lockdowns in every province in the country. We had vaccine mandates discriminating against people in ways none of us had seen in our lifetimes. And then I guess the spark that really set it off was the federal government making it illegal for Canadian truckers to reasonably re-enter Canada when doing long hauls to the States and back. Essentially putting a lot of these truckers out of work because they were so dangerously spreading COVID, driving around trucks by themselves for weeks on end. And that finally set it off. And it came, as one would hope, from Alberta. This was an Alberta-grown movement. It comes out of here, goes to Ottawa, and the rest is history. Nigel, why do you think? What was the big impact of this? Why do you think this deserves to be one of the biggest stories of 2022?
First, it is the big story because it tied up the downtown of the capital for several weeks. That in itself makes it the big story. The other part of it, though, is that it was a genuine, decent, relatively well-organized and peaceful demonstration where citizens came together to tell the government what was on their minds, that the government was wrong. And then, first the government wouldn't meet them to be more specific. The Prime Minister would not receive any communications from them, have the representatives over there to the, good Lord, they were parked right outside the lingerie block.
I think
it wouldn't
they
have
heard
been far to walk.
I think they heard him.
And, he wouldn't talk to them. And then they brought in, as it is pretty clear from the inquiry, they brought in the Emergencies Act, which of course is the old War Measures Act by another name. And so it was a massive government overreach that sparked it in the first place, and a tone-deaf government that wouldn't hear them when they got there, and finally a massive government overreaction that brought it to a close. Of course, it's the top story. And this has been brewing for a long time. We've had Mr. Trudeau in office now since 2015, and although he puts a sunny face on it, you keep seeing legislation walking along that is intended to limit people in so many ways. And I know we're going to get to some of those other ways later, but there has been a feeling brewing in this country, and you could really feel it here in Alberta, of saying, okay, it's time to take a stand, it's time to fight back, it's time to say no to all this. I think that was the feeling that put Pierre Poilievre into the OLO.
So that's where I want to pick up with Cory here.
Okay.
Let's talk about the political fallout of this. The most tangible political fallout was the end of Aaron O'Toole as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. That was a very direct result. He equivocated, opposed it, mildly supported it. Most people don't know this, but there's a lot of background stuff where he was going to try and use this to oust Poilievre from the Conservatives. That backfired on him. O'Toole's gone. And then you get Poilievre as leader. I think that's a pretty direct result that came from it. More indirectly, but I still think related, I think it at least contributed to the end of Jason Kenney, because it really it mobilized the anti-lockdown, anti-mandate, kind of pro-freedom movement to a whole new level, and it elevated it to center stage. And you had Kenney kind of equivocating again. You saw him kind of panic, in a panic, trying to get rid of some of the mandates he had, so he didn't look like Trudeau. But at the Coutts blockade and in Ottawa, people were coming at Kenney just as hard as they were coming at Trudeau. So I think a bit more indirectly, but still related. This probably also helped to take down Kenney, and eventually, again, leads to Smith. How fair do you think, the O'Toole one is obviously fair, but how fair do you think it is kind of linking the Kenney and Smith part in? And what do you think were the other big political ramifications that came from the Freedom Convoy?
Yeah, well, I mean, with Kenney, I think maybe it might have been the final thing, but this was kind of already happening. I mean, he tried to play both sides of the fence with the COVID restrictions that he burned, and he just basically infuriated both sides. He had no base of support left anymore when the time came. And when things were brought to such a head, it certainly fed the finale. I mean, it fed people in realizing they can oppose something. Like I think a large part of what this story was a segment of people shed off the Canadian attitude of, well, I'm pretty upset with that, but I'll just let it go and shrug. No, they got up and they did something, and they pushed back, and they sent the government into panic. They were powerful, whether you agree with the convoy or not. They made an impression, and it changed the political atmosphere. And the long run still has to be measured out in that. I think that Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre both rode into their leaderships by playing to that segment of the base to win that. But that segment also is a minority within the electorate at large. So they've got to watch that they don't corner themselves too far into that. But the convoy changed the face of politics in Canada, without doubt. I mean, the Sovereignty Act, the Saskatchewan First Act, again, were both responses to a federal government that's viewed as overreaching and getting too much into our face. I don't think we would have seen those kind of acts 3 years ago, no matter who the premiers were. So it's had an impact, and we're still seeing what's going to come from this.
Cory, you can just see the strength of feeling that was behind there when the truckers said, yes, by all means, send us money. They raised more money in a week than the Liberal Party would raise in 3 months.
I already read my column.
Well,
I got the numbers down.
You left it on the screen.
Yeah.
We should freeze the bank accounts of anyone who's ever donated to the Liberal Party. So, far more dangerous to Canada than a couple of truckers. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, segues in nicely. I think one of the, definitely in Alberta, and it was a national story, was the fall of Jason Kenney. A year ago today, very few people, I think, would have predicted that Jason Kenney wouldn't even make it to the end of his first term. You know, when he was driving around Alberta in the blue truck, trying to drum together the UCP and then his leadership race, he always would say about Rachel Notley, one and done. We're going to make the NDP the first one-term government in Alberta history. Well, Jason Kenney was also one and done. In fact, Rachel Notley lasted almost a year longer than Jason Kenney did. He's gone. A lot of the country has a hard time wrapping their minds around it because I think conservatives elsewhere, they remember the older Jason Kenney, the one that was elected UCP leader, the cerebral, smart guy, staunch conservative. They didn't really see the Kenney that Albertans saw over the last 2 and 3 years that, you know, was locking down, was kind of dealing with Ottawa very tepidly, lots of furrowed brows and news releases, but not actually doing very much. Maybe we'll kind of kick off with you, Cory. What were the big reasons you think that fueled the fall of Jason Kenney that few outside of probably the Western Standard offices here would have predicted was even in the cards a year ago?
Well, I guess say what maybe 2 years ago wouldn't have been in the cards. You could kind of see it coming a year ago now. But
most of the media a year ago, I don't think were taking it. Well, actually, a year ago, they were starting to recognize that at least a few
the review
people were
was starting
upset,
to bubble up.
but I don't think anyone would have predicted he'd be gone.
No, I think people would have thought he'd weather this storm. The discontent within the party was definitely just too much for him to manage to turn around. I think that the slow burning part, though, was, as you put it, his tepid approach with Ottawa. I mean, he talked very big getting in to voters in Alberta and to his members on, we're going to do the Fair Deal panel. We're going to bring a pension plan. We're going to bring Alberta Police Force. We're going to do all of these measures. And he hadn't done a single thing. It barely started the process towards it after 2.5 years, 3 years in office. People were, well, when are you going to get on with this? Because Trudeau is getting ever more intrusive with us, and Jason Kenney's still spinning his wheels. So that frustrated a lot of people. And again, the burning on the pandemic. I mean, he brought in the restrictions, but he would talk out of both sides of his mouth. He'd keep promising, I'm not going to do it. We will never have a vaccine passport.
That's a direct quote.
And he brought in a vaccine passport.
About a week after he said it.
We're going to have the best summer ever. We're never locking down again. He locked down again. He expended his political capital on, when he would take firm stands, they were stands he had to back off on or felt he had to back off on in short order. He just lost the trust and support of people on all sides of the issue.
Nigel, I want to talk about the media on this because it's one of the biggest stories of 2022, but I think it wasn't until February that the media realized that he was in trouble. Jason Kenney didn't seem to realize he was in trouble until they were a couple of days out from what was supposed to be the big in-person vote in Red Deer, and they realized people registered to vote were 3-1 against him, and that's when they changed the rules to try and even the playing field a bit. But it wasn't until, I think, early February, maybe January, that the media collectively said, okay, it seems his leadership is in trouble. But here we had seen this for a long time coming. Why do you think the big legacy media just totally missed the boat on this story until it was like happening? Because the signs were all there.
Well, there are quite a few reasons why that could be so. One of them is that the legacy media gets a narrative in its head, not just about this, but about anything, and it makes it. Once the idea is firmly there, it takes quite a lot to dislodge that idea. So, all right, the narrative was that Premier Kenney had been a very successful federal cabinet minister. He'd come back to Alberta. Bought the blue truck, he'd driven all over the province, he'd organized the party, he'd put the two together. Now we have the United Conservative Party, and he'd gone out and won a very, very convincing electoral victory over Rachel Notley. What sort of trouble could he possibly be in? And it wasn't until you kept getting these stories about nomination meetings that where a Kenney candidate had been not only chosen, but others had been disqualified for one reason or another, and often the reasons weren't particularly good. Now, the first time a reporter gets a story like that, well, it's an outlier. When you get enough of them, they start to think, oh, well, what is going on there? So it took a while to change the narrative. That I think is the first one. The other thing, and this sort of leads directly back to the government's response to COVID, is that somewhere along the line, the media forgot that their job was to question and to challenge what the government was saying. Not to necessarily come out in gross opposition to it, but say, if you're doing this, why are you doing that? They forgot that, and instead they lined up, got the press release. If it comes from the government, if it comes from Alberta Health, then this must be the right thing to do. We're doing a public service by making sure you have accurate information. Except half the time, it wasn't accurate information. It was the very opposite. It was deceptive, and I would go so far as to say manipulative. But anyway, that's a different argument. So it wasn't a long stretch from not getting the narrative about Kenney, but then seeing him as the official spokesman for the authorized point of view. And so he doesn't think the media gave him a break, but in a lot of ways they did.
I think the biggest one has still been missed here. I think it's that most people who work in journalism simply didn't know who any of these people who were so angry. Those people, they tend to live not where journalists live. Journalists tend to live in the downtown major urban centers of the country, mostly in the Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto triangle, but even media here, they live in downtown Calgary, downtown Edmonton. And these people came from rural or they came from suburbs, not all, but disproportionately. And they had very different worldviews, different political views. And, just as we might say, well, it's impossible that the NDP could ever win in Alberta because I don't know anyone who votes NDP. Well, maybe because we don't roll in those circles, because we have our bubbles. And the media live in their own social bubbles. They just simply didn't know these people. The media, people who work in the media, for the most part, didn't know anyone who was really angry about mandatory vaccination, mandatory masking, lockdowns. And so their worldview was unable to touch it, that these people don't really exist. They are a small fringe minority.
You're onto something there, Derek, and it reminds me, if I can tell you a 20-second little anecdote to that point. It was 2006. Stephen Harper's election victory had just been announced, and there were some of us in the editorial board who were still there waiting to comment on this.
This is your time at the Calgary Herald.
Yeah, this is at the Calgary Herald in 2006. And somebody from the newsroom comes down. This is not a result they were expecting. Now they've got to get comments from conservatives, and I won't name this individual because he's still active in the business. But he said, "Any of you guys, listen, we need some contacts. Anybody, we need a conservative." All they knew were liberals. So there is a certain amount of what you're saying there that they probably didn't know who to ask or who to go and see. They didn't know about Cory Morgan.
Yeah. I think it's kind of it's the symptom of just a broader issue that helps. It's not always that the media have an agenda. It's just they just might not know people outside of these circles who don't live where they do and think like they do.
That's right. Biggest source of media bias is just, I don't see the point of this, and choosing to report something else when actually it's quite an important story.
Well, our tangents are working great today because I think this rolls over nicely into the comeback of Danielle Smith. I don't think a lot of people a year ago would have said, I think Danielle Smith is going to be premier. Now, I remember it was just over a year ago, November 2021. Me and Cory, as before you joined us, we were at the UCP convention at the Grey Eagle Casino just outside Calgary here, the Tsutsina Reserve. Mm-hmm. And Danielle Smith she was doing some freelance work with us. And so she was on the show. And Jason Kenney's behind her on the stage, and she just kind of says, if Jason Kenney wasn't the leader anymore, I'd run to replace him. And we all just kind of fell out of our chairs. Danielle Smith announced on the Western Standard in the same room with Jason Kenney that she wanted his job.
I hope we've got a clip of that.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
You know what? We should make a note of that because that's a highlight. That was a real highlight.
That was the first solid hint that, holy crap, she's making another go of it.
It wasn't a hint. She said she would if he's gone. It was a pretty frontal shot. But still at that time, it was like, could she really win? Because she had just so much baggage from kind of the disastrous end of her time as Wild Rose leader. She had a tremendous start to it, but then totally melted down in the most spectacular fashion in December of 2014. Actually, we're on the anniversary date. I think it was the 21st. I'll never forget. It was like Pearl Harbor for me when that went down. But again, I don't think I was skeptical at first that she could do it, but I thought she had a real chance. Most of the legacy media, I think, didn't really give her a chance, though. They had just seen Kenney defeated by what they saw as a redneck rabble, but of course it's going to be Kenney's chosen successor, or if not Travis Taves, it was going to be Brian Jean because he's the big name. Danielle Smith was just too radical, too out there, but then she just dominated. We'll start with you, Nigel. Why do you think the comeback of Danielle Smith deserves to be one of the big stories of the year? And why would it be different than most ordinary leadership campaigns that stand out this way? Because BC had a leadership campaign. Sorry, I just kind of asked you a question, then go right back to myself. I throw it back to myself. I didn't mean to do that, but BC had a leadership race to replace an incumbent premier, John Horgan. I can't even remember the new guy's name.
Davey.
Davey.
Mm-hmm.
Davey. We can make it one name. Almost no press. Like, it was just quiet and was boring. And then in Alberta, it was just this raucous Royal Rumble affair from start to finish, wall-to-wall coverage. The country was talking about it, and we're a smaller province than BC. So why do you think that this story should be in the top stories of 2022 and not Dave Eby or whoever his name is in BC?
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the October Revolution here.
The October Revolution.
Okay. And they didn't in 1916. They didn't see that coming the next year either.
1917.
Well, 1917 was the revolution, but before it happened,
they didn't see it happen.
They didn't see it coming.
No.
And just the same, a lot of people last year didn't see this coming.
But like 1917, everyone should have seen it coming in 16.
It's hindsight, eh?
Yeah.
2020. Well, I think that there's a number of reasons why that. Again, there's a number of reasons why that this one dominated. For the first thing, in the BC, if you want to compare it to the BC leadership succession. Mr. Horgan was diagnosed with cancer. Otherwise, he'd still be there.
Yeah.
So, it was very sad. It wasn't the worst NDP premier that you could possibly imagine. And I think a lot of people felt genuinely sorry about it when he announced his intention to retire. But, it had to be done, and somebody had to take the job, and they went through the motions.
There was no coup. There was no palace coup to take him down.
No, there was no. Nothing personal about any of it. It was just business. So that explains the relatively low key of the BC leadership race. Whereas, of course, just a few moments ago, you outlined the different factions that were operating within Alberta. That mad as hell, not going to take it anymore crowd out in the country, who we love, by the way. When I say they're a crowd, I'm not saying that they're rabble.
We mean them the best possible way.
We absolutely. These people have got the right idea. So, but on the other hand, there were people who would read the mainstream media, get the information from Alberta Health Services, instinctively trusted that source, even when they didn't understand. They said, well, it must be right because it comes from Alberta Health Services. Very compliant, and the biggest thing about Danielle Smith. This is why she attracts the bad press that she gets. She actually wants to change something. She has ideas, and she's already put into practice a rather large number of them. But the thing is, people say they want change, but they actually don't. They just want a change of caretaker. Mm-hmm. And this would have been if Travis Taves had won the leadership, well, things would probably just go on the way they've been going on. No disrespects to Mr. Taves, he's an excellent finance minister, but he wasn't out to change the world. Danielle Smith is out to change Alberta, at any rate. And much of the opposition she runs into is that people either don't understand what it is that she's trying to do, or alternatively would react badly to any kind of change. So that makes this whole process extremely is vitally important for Alberta. It's also fascinating to watch as a political story unfolding. I did not ever think that we would see, for example, an Alberta Sovereignty Act. I didn't think we would see a provincial government say, you know what, we're not going to collect firearms just because Mr. Trudeau says so. Now we've got Saskatchewan doing the same thing. So many things that are just complete disconnects from anything that's gone before. So we'll see what kind of appetite Alberta has to get behind the, strong leader.
Cory, actually, I should not be phrasing it as, why do you think it's the biggest story of the year? You weren't in the room because you were doing something else. But why do you think this is one of the biggest stories of the year? If not, or you can say why you don't think it should be. That's fine. And when do you think the media realized this was a big deal with her, that she can win? She dominated most of the race. She came to dominate fairly early, but when she launched, I don't think it was taken that seriously. It was definitely not taken very seriously when she was on a Western Standard program November last year at the UCP convention. Says, Kenny's gone, I think I'm going to run. I mean, people chuckled at it, but I don't think most people took it that seriously. So, why do you think this is one of the biggest stories of the year, if you do think it is? And when do you think the media started to realize she could actually do this? She might win.
Yeah, well, and it is the biggest story of the year because basically it's not just a lot of people just didn't see it coming. The Phoenix rose from the ashes. Last November, I was among those who laughed it off. Okay, I mean, I still respect Danielle and, a powerful person, but to be able to take the leadership and become the premier of this province after your history, I mean, I've gotten over it, but I just can't see it. I would never have believed it at that point. By the time the leadership campaign was going full bore, I was along the lines of, she's going to win this thing. I mean, just remember from our bets from it, but it took till then before I could see it. So the media was just as gobsmacked. I mean, they had dismissed her initially. And again, kind of just to reiterate what Nigel has been saying, she represents change, and it's not just here. Other premiers are watching her, and that's what's really got the establishment afraid. I mean, you notice it's not just the domestic legacy media, local, that's been lined up against her. When have we ever seen a premier so consistently attacked from Central Canadian press? I mean, their focus is on this little province of Alberta, almost 4 times as much as you would see their focus on Ontario with Doug Ford, which is their own turf. Because if she succeeds in these changes, she's going to inspire others. And
she did. We got the Saskatchewan first.
Mo is definitely already following along those lines. Even Manitoba has been showing things, and it undercuts the establishment in general. People who are afraid of change realize she will bring it. She's quite different from Kenney, who talked big and did little. Smith is going to follow through what she says she's doing, and for better or for worse. And that's really got some people terrified, and it's really got me excited. So I think it's a great, it's a top story because we haven't seen a revolutionary type premier like that in a long, long time.
But you'll notice what they're doing. They're treating it as a process story. In Eastern Canada, there's not a lot of analysis of what this really represents, the Sovereignty Act, other than, it must be rubbish because it comes from Alberta. But the personalities involved, that's what media likes, always has liked. Look for the fight between people. That's part of why it's getting so much attention back there and being treated the way that it is. Just
it
the way
makes for good copy.
It makes good copy.
I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but when we were over at the Premier's Southern office, just around the corner from our office here, last Friday for the year-end interview, she said before the interview started, and I think this is probably not out of turn to repeat. She was talking about incrementalism versus big bold change, and she says I'm along the lines of I don't want to be an incrementalist of managing Rachel Notley's socialism. I want to destroy Rachel Notley's socialism and then incrementally bring in conservative policy. But,
and to get it back to where it should be, and then run that.
Get us back to kind of get to a year zero of some kind here. Get to a point, and then make some incremental changes. But that we've got to have a much more revolutionary wiping of the slate of, and I think she would probably mean more than just not like we're going back through pretty badly managed years of Jim Prentice, Alison Redford, Ed Stelmach, and unfortunately probably the last term of Ralph Klein. The guy quit drinking and just went to hell. So like we've had a combination of bad or mediocre government for a long time in this province, And she does not appear to be set to be an incrementalist premier, and it's a roll of the dice. But I think it's fair to say she will be, at the very least, I think she's probably more revolutionary than Klein was.
I think you're right there. I mean, one of the reasons why we had such a lot of bad government for so long is that we had such a lot of money, and it was always easier to just buy off the problem. You know, give this group more money, give that group more money when the negotiations came up, and so we ended up with a very high cost government. And then, of course, when the money stopped, all these problems suddenly became very sharply in focus, and you find that you can't afford socialism, which is how we ended up with, what is it, $100 billion in debt. But when she says things like, I want to build up the Heritage Fund, I believe her. That is the kind of conservative policy that she would do.
But let's remember, every single premier since, what was his nuts after Lougheed? Getty. Everyone since Getty has said that, and hasn't really. Now, Klein did put away savings. It wasn't into the Heritage Fund, but it was into other savings pots.
I think it was called the Rainy Day Fund. Or certainly it was referred to as that.
It was referred to as the Rainy Day Fund. So Klein did save, but everyone's talked about saving, and it hasn't really happened. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think she's genuine in her desire to do it, but actually doing it's going to be a lot tougher.
You know what I reckon that she may do on the Heritage Fund? Instead of withdrawing the interest on it every year to pay for ongoing programs, she'll start letting some of that build up.
At least not withdraw the interest. Yeah.
No, but that's what's been going on ever since the Heritage Fund was established.
Yeah. Okay. Well, God, our segues are perfect, because we were talking about Smith saying she's not going to force the Alberta government, police, and prosecutors to comply with federal gun grabs. Well, we're going to talk now about the great gun grab of 2022. It's maybe a bit of a misnomer because it's been happening for a long time, but I think it's fair to say 2022, the gun grab coming from Ottawa reached a whole new level. We had in the spring, the federal government announced that they will ban the sale, gifting, and transfer of handguns in Canada. And they thought that, well, that means everyone's going to stop buying guns right now because they know that we're going to be banning it and they're going to be worthless. Much to the shock and horror of Ottawa and the Toronto Star, handgun sales went absolutely freaking crazy. I remember we announced it. I told everyone at the Western Standard, everyone's like, oh my God, we got to get our handguns. So I said, the Western Standard will loan any employee up to $500 to buy handguns. We called it the Western, I think we called it something along the lines of the Western Standard Employee Armament Loan Program. And I guess this got out. The Toronto Star saw it, and they ran a big story saying, my God, look at these absolute nuts out west. They haven't got the message. You're not supposed to have handguns anymore. And then we had wholesalers contact us and say, we're going to sell any Western Standard employee handguns at wholesale prices. And so it
was a great deal.
It was great. It was great. I kind of liked it because I had all the excuse I needed at home to go out gun shopping.
Sorry, honey, we have to buy it now. We'd be crazy not to.
It will be illegal very soon from now. So handgun sales went through the friggin' roof. Record handgun sales this summer. Eventually, then the federal government was panicking because they didn't have a bill to ban it, so they had to find some weird, bizarre regulatory workarounds. I think they did something involving like dairy import bans and some obscure powers the government had to try and regulate the stop of it. So there's that on handguns. Now, I know handgun owners, we don't get as much sympathy as regular hunting rifle and shotgun owners. People say, what do you need a handgun for? Well, this is still a free country, isn't it? I don't have to answer your stupid questions. I can have a handgun because I want a handgun. That's all the reason I need. But either way, handgun owners have less public sympathy than, say, hunting rifle and shotgun owners. So then fast forward to this fall, and the Liberals bring in a new bill. And it's to put in legislation what they said they were going to do, and that's ban the sale of handguns. And then just a few weeks ago, we get an amendment to the bill at the committee level. And it's more or less the Liberals are just going to ban a shit ton of regular hunting rifles, all sorts of basic stuff. If you got a semi-automatic rifle with a detachable magazine, well, surprise, surprise, that's now an assault-style rifle. absolutely nuts stuff. And it seems to have blown up in their faces. We'll start with you, Nigel. Do you think this deserves to be one of the big stories of 2022? And at what point do you think the media started to catch on that this was not a story that's just going to anger the hardcore gun enthusiasts?
Well, they started to get that when they suddenly realized, well, if it's a hunting rifle and it's used for hunting, that probably isn't what the crime problem is on the bad streets of major cities in Canada. So, not that we like guns, they said, but there seems to be a logical disconnect in what the federal government is trying to do. And even some of the, the people that we criticize here for the way they attack things, well, that actually doesn't make any sense, does it? How is this going to help? So that was the first thing. The thing with the reason why a lot of people are exercised about this, and tell me if this is another of these fortuitous segues, but you can't take this in isolation from some of the other things that the federal government has done. If it was just a firearms issue, maybe you could. But this is also, and I know you want to talk about this later, this is coming from a government that wants to restrict press freedom. This is coming from a government that spent 2.5 years telling people what to do about a pandemic without really knowing themselves what was the right answer. You could go on. There's a whole culture of control that this is just one part of. People are starting to catch on that there is this culture of control. They're not liking it. And it starts to put issues like firearms ownership in a slightly different light.
Well, I should mention, this segment in particular is sponsored by the Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
Yes. All right. Well,
our favorite guys, you guys all know, I've been a member of the CSSA for well over a decade. These guys kick ass. If you want to keep your guns, you better be a member of the CSSA now. So we'll go to you, Cory. I think this story has kind of taken on a new life. When it was just handgun owners, we're a fairly small part of the population. People seem to think that, legally purchased handgun, people they purchase a handgun on Monday and they go knock off a 7-Eleven on Tuesday. That's not happening. Handguns used in the Commission of Crimes in Canada are more than 99% are smuggled from the United States. But the amendment to this bill, when they started ensnaring bona fide hunting rifles, which people could not deny, these are legitimate hunting rifles. I think there is sort of an agrarian romanticism in Canada still of the hunter. The hunter is, there might not be a lot of sympathy for the oil field worker, but there is a romanticization of the farmer. And if most people aren't farmers, we kind of idolize it in kind of agrarian way. Same with the hunter. Most people don't have much sympathy with someone who goes down to the gun club and fires off a 9mm for the afternoon. But the guy who goes out and shoots deer or shoots a moose, it's a very Canadian thing to do. Why do you think the media itself actually started to pay more attention to this and actually put at least some critical light on the new gun grab stuff?
Yeah, well, part of it is because they threw their own fart catchers under the bus. We've had this debate going on for months and months, say on social media with the other blue checks and legacy media, fine. And people like me saying they're coming after legitimately on firearms. No, they aren't. They're never going after hunting firearms. They're never doing it. They said it a dozen times, a dozen ways.
Yeah.
And now suddenly there's no denying they have just gone after a whole large amount of hunting firearms that were never a problem. So these defenders of that act now have egg on their faces, and not all of them are as shameless with their lies as Minister Mendicino, who would just lie and forget about it the day after. They're embarrassed. Yeah, I know the same feeling back when I was still somewhat supportive of Premier Kenney, when I was saying, look, he said he's never bringing a vaccine passport. He's obviously never going to bring in a vaccine passport. And then later on, I'm people rubbing in my face. And, hey, geez, Cory, I thought you said, I guess I was wrong.
I was not very supportive. And even I didn't think he would go that far. Yeah. I was like,
but the media feels that way. I mean, they were carrying water for this for quite a while. And suddenly now they don't have a defense for this anymore either. So, elements of it, the media anyways, and the vocal people within it. So I think that's part of it. They're like, okay, that's enough. I can't do this for you guys anymore. If you're going to keep moving the goalposts, this isn't worth it. You're obviously not going after criminals. You're going after guns.
Well, it's funny. The biggest stories of the year I've put in more or less as much as I could chronological order of when they took place, and they all segue so perfectly to each other. And this segues us perfectly to our last one: federal control over the press and the internet. Segueing from what you said, Nigel, about there seems to be all of these strange attempts by government, particularly the federal government, to assert new levels of control, scope and size and scope of control over people's lives, particularly from the federal government. And they seem to be kind of siloed on their own. But when you kind of zoom out at the bigger picture, it's much more worrisome. And one of the most worrisome has got to be federal control over the press and the internet in Canada. Now, this is going back some time, but not that long before we returned the Western Standard to publication, the federal government announced a $600 million bailout package for the media. And people watch here know we don't take that. But then we've started to see other bills. The Online Harms Bill, which would heavily censor social media for offensive content, sometimes stuff that's probably genuinely bad and should probably not be there. But also, we know where this would go. It would just be offensive stuff that challenges the federal government and the official narratives of things. Or then we saw...
Or you call it misinformation or disinformation.
You just label it misinformation, disinformation, and you're gone.
They should ban that one, yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
That kind of thing. And then the most recent one, something called the Online News Act, which sounds fairly innocuous, but I'd always be cautious when the government has news in an act. It means you have some kind of regulation of the news and of the press. And so we've got the Online News Act, which is the one that's really gone below the radar right now because the legacy media don't want to talk about it too much because they lobbied for it. You've got something called Newspapers Canada, which is the lobby organization representing the big corporate press conglomerates in Canada. Post Media, Globe Media, Torstar Corp, all these things. And the idea is more or less put a gun to the head of Facebook and Google and say, you owe these guys money because you did them the favor of distributing their content. Mm-hmm. Tons of you guys are watching this on Facebook right now. And if you're watching this on Facebook right now and this bill passes as it is, we will be banned from Facebook at some point in the new year. Because Facebook has said if this bill passes, we're not handing money off the companies that haven't earned it from us in a regular commercial agreement. We're just going to kick the news off of Facebook. And the legislators have put this bill together in such a way as it makes it illegal for the Western Standard to say, we want no part of this. We don't think Facebook owes us any money, and we don't owe Facebook any money, and we just want to put our content on Facebook. And that's what's happening now. So you've got now federal control over social media platforms and the media itself together, trying to really go after the distribution of media. So with you, Nigel, but why do you think it's come to this? Why do you think the legacy media has lobbied so strongly for it? And do you think this is one of the? It's definitely not gotten the top 5-6 press stories of the year by coverage. But why do you think it deserves to be in here? Yeah. Why would the media report on them trying to fleece companies using the power of the government?
I think the way you asked the question is to suggest the answer. Look, I mean, what this is, the long game here, what this is going to do is going to put us back to the days when the only place you got your news was from a newspaper. You're not going to be able to just log in while you have your coffee at your kitchen table, check the news before you head off to work, because it won't be there if Facebook does indeed do what it says it's going to do. But let's face it.
Well, you'll be limited to going to westernstandard.news. That's the only place you'll be able to find it.
Or nationalpost.com or whatever.
Yeah, but it won't show up in your feeds anymore.
But it isn't going to show up in your feeds. And so, if you can sort of picture the days when things got passed around by fax, and the only way you could get a hold of somebody was by a landline, the days before the internet, that's kind of the technology that you're going to be dealing with. You'll hear things on the radio. If you want to see it on TV, you can turn on, but you're not going to be able to get the feeds on your phone that you can read while you're on the C train going to the office. And that's really going to hurt. Now, that works for the. This works in two ways. One is that the media, the old media, when they're the only game in town, will of course have some stay of execution. I don't know whether it's possible to drive people back to newsprint by taking away electronics, but there'll be some upside to them. But if they do, it goes the other way, and they do decide to, and Facebook relents on this. The old media gets paid, and they're also getting paid by the government. How fair, impartial, and unbiased do you think you could possibly be?
To ask the question is to imply the answer.
Exactly.
Cory, I want to talk.
A problem now.
Yeah. Let's talk in particular about why this wasn't one of the biggest stories in terms of how much coverage it got in the year, when it's an absolutely earth-shattering bill. It will change the nature of media in Canada. If Facebook just flips off the news, says no more news on Facebook in Canada, that'll mean everyone's readership goes down. Now, it's already happened. Facebook has been throttling how much news shows up in your algorithms for some time. Like, we've seen our proportion on Facebook go down. All the other publishers I've talked to all see the same thing. So they've been kind of putting their thumbs on the scales of how much news shows in your feeds now. But it's still a big portion of what we get. But it's a relatively smaller portion of what the big guys, the old print media and the broadcast media rely on. They can always go back to, so if they lose Facebook, well, they can always just go ask for more subsidies to make up the difference. Say, geez, Facebook's so mean. Give us more cash, Papa Trudeau. But I want your take on why do you think it hasn't been one of the biggest stories of the year in terms of coverage? One is probably one of the most substantial federal bills in decades.
Well, I would bet there's probably been countless columns that have been spiked by perhaps some guys who thought they could write up on this, and they submitted it, and somewhere in the editorial level they said, no, we're just not going to talk about that right now. I mean, the self-interest is evident. They don't want to highlight something that is protecting a dinosaur, and that's what it is. And they're going. And it's the story of the year. I guess it'll be more of the story I told you so when this collapses, I think, though, because it'd be nice to think that perhaps people could go back to the days of paper and print, but they won't. But things will change, and the internet is it's living. They're going to be playing whack-a-mole. I mean, if Facebook isn't covering it, you got to remember Google's a big factor in this too. Mm-hmm. So you got to get direct URLs. What you'll see is a boom in secondary advertising, because now you're going to have to advertise elsewhere to reach people, to let them know, come here to read our content, and people aren't going to like that. I think it'll help in the long run with maverick publications like ours, if you even want to call it that, an alternative and new media. And this is the last gasp. So, I mean, you can subsidize and keep that dying institution alive for a while, but their business model's broken, and they'd rather chase subsidies and forcing people to take part in their old model rather than adjust themselves. Like, I'll just throw in a quick analogy from my past career when I was a surveyor. It frustrated me. I spent my first 3 years out there getting abused by a surveyor as a rodman, yelled at, freezing cold and holding the rod and pounding lath before they would even let me touch a transit. And then I had to learn my formulas, and I had to learn how to calculate area and elevations. And then GPS came along and completely wiped out my trade. You know, nowadays a person can pull out a smartphone and do in seconds without any training what took me years to get to. Mm-hmm. And some surveyors got lost with that. They couldn't adapt themselves to GPS. I learned how to do digital mapping and other things and adapted and got another 15 years out of that career. But some of the older surveyors, they couldn't, and they got left behind. And what we've got right now with a lot of the legacy media members are those older surveyors. They're fighting it with all they've got, but unless they can change themselves, they're going to get left behind. They're going to lose this in the long run.
I think you're right. And this bill passes, it's going to be very tough on us, even though we want absolutely nothing to do with it. But we will endure. Actually, that's a really important reason why y'all need to be on our newsletter. Because if we get shut off of Facebook, if this bill passes and Facebook gets shut down for us, you're going to need to get your morning blast in the morning. That's how you're going to have to find us. It's gonna be tough. So make sure you're a member. Make sure you're on our newsletter. Go to westernstandard.news. Well, gentlemen, it's been a hell of a year. It's been a very good year, I think.
Catch our
yes.
big. We are running is now over 20 long columns by people who know what they're talking
You're a
about.
fanatic editor.
As a year, yeah. Fanaticism is in the DNA. Look, we've got a lot of really smart people who are delivering their thoughts, not only about what has happened in 2022, but also in 2023. After this program, you'll see the trailer for it. So watch it and come to our website and take a look. These people know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great series that Nigel set up from a lot of our best columnists across Canada. Retrospective on 2022 and looking
ahead.
forward into 2023. Nigel, Cory, it's been a great 2022 with you guys. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas
see you
to
soon.
all
Merry
our
Christmas.
readers.
And Merry Christmas and New Year very soon to all of you, our loyal Western Standard readers, watchers, and listeners. It's been such an honor to be with you this year in this tremendous year of growth. I had a great 2022. So thank all of you for that great year, and Merry Christmas.